My husband started teasing me after I suffered a serious head injury. I literally can't go on like this. Back before my head injury, my husband and I had this cheesy ritual. If I ever got held up late at the office and needed to catch the last train home, he'd wait for me at the station and accidentally brush against me as I disembarked at the platform. He'd put on a bashful voice, acting like we were meeting for the first time, and say, "I'm sorry I bumped into you, ma'am, it's just you, the most distracting green eyes. Could I maybe walk you home?" And every damn time, it made me melt like butter in a hot pan. Yes, I know I'm lame. But one night, the platform was empty when those automatic doors hissed shut behind me. My stomach lurched. Exiting the station, a concrete set of stairs spat you out into a long, filthy, poorly lit underground tunnel, and this was the real reason for Darren and I's tradition, because neither of us liked the idea of me walking home by myself. As my calls went unanswered, I stood there, my leg bouncing up and down. Lampposts flicked on beyond the iron fence surrounding the station, and the sky grew darker until, finally, I saw no choice other than to set off as quickly as I could. Inside the underpass, sputtering halogen bulbs were spaced out every 10 meters or so. I half-walked, half-jogged from one flickering pool of light to the next, inhaling through my mouth to avoid the combined stink of 1,000 relieved bladders. Halfway along, a rapid skitter of footsteps rushed up behind me. I spun around. My chest collided with something solid, then two hands shot out and grabbed me by the wrists. In the dim light, I could make out dark hair and a set of deep, blue eyes. I heaved a giant sigh of relief. "Darren." "Darling," the man answered. Altogether, the hairs along my arms and neck stood on end. It wasn't my husband. My brain went into full-blown panic mode, which means the rest of the encounter is still a giant blur, but I know I lashed out with punches and kicks. My fingernails raked the man's left eye and gouged his nose. He kept yelling something, but it was impossible to hear beneath my screams bouncing off the walls. At one point I bit down on his hand, hard, and his skin's rough texture is the part clearest in my mind. After that, there are images of me lying in a gathering pool of blood while the man apologizes, and if I really squint my memory, there's confused glimpses of sharp teeth intermixed with a haze of darkness. From there, everything jump cuts to a ring of empty faces towering over me. Those faces were like the expressionless mannequins you see in shop windows. With my heart in my throat, I thrashed around in a soft bed, screaming until the mannequins rushed to restrain me. Then I rode off into a wave of blackness. Next time the world slid into focus, a single mannequin was beside my bed, dressed in a nurse's uniform. A soft, disembodied voice came floating along, promising everything would be okay. From somewhere close by, the continuous beep 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 of a heart monitor gathered speed, and, gradually, I realized I was in a hospital. I swallowed a lump and asked the nurse what happened to her face. The voice asked what I meant. I said the nurse's skull looked as if when God designed her he'd loaded up Photoshop and gone crazy with the smudge tool. It was a smooth mound of pink flesh. The faceless nurse explained I'd suffered a serious head injury and showered me with kindness and support while a series of torches got shown in my eyes and my vitals got checked a dozen or so times. The voice kept telling me not to move around too much, otherwise the stitches across the top of my head might have popped loose. Another figure with an empty skull, this one dressed in a doctor's coat, came and stood at the foot of my bed, and that's when I first heard the term prosopagnosia, also known as face blindness. The condition can result from a traumatic brain injury. What followed was a flurry of activity. Darren, who I only recognized by his haircut and voice, was allowed to sit with me. I squeezed his hand throughout the onslaught of tears and endless visits from neurologists. On his way to the station the night of the attack, Darren had seen a newly licensed teen driver slam on their brakes way too late to stop at a red light. An old lady got sent careening into the air, and Darren called for an ambulance while he applied pressure to the poor woman's chest to keep her from bleeding out. That was the reason he missed my calls. A woman named Tracy and her German Shepherd, Buster, were drawn to the tunnel by my screams. Tracy sicked Buster on my attacker, who bolted off in the direction of the station, covered in my blood. Both Tracy and Buster visited me at the hospital, and we posed for a photo which made the front page of the local newspaper. The story about a hero dog included a blurb about my condition, even though we specifically asked the reporter not to include it. 2 police officers, who I could only distinguish by their difference in height, questioned me about my attacker. Judging by their irritated voices, they'd hoped to learn more than his hair looked sorta like Darren's. Although it took days of interrogation, I convinced Darren to reveal what else authorities knew about the man. It turned out, after Buster chased him to the platform, the bastard took off running along the curved track. Tracy called the police, who went after him, flashlights in hand, but only discovered a discarded backpack a quarter-mile north. So far as anybody could tell, my attacker dropped it climbing a fence to escape into the loading bay of a warehouse. Inside the pack they found creepshots of me, along with journal entries and love letters filled with strange details about our supposed relationship. The officers said he might have been stalking me for as long as half a year, living out a fantasy in which we were husband and wife. Their promises they'd have him in custody soon rang a little hollow. In the weeks I spent confined to the ward, I got a crash course in how difficult life with prosopagnosia really is. Dressed in their identical hospital gowns, my fellow patients were impossible to tell apart unless they had a unique feature, like green nail polish, and I suffered a mild panic attack every time somebody in my inner circle changed their hairstyle or bought a new outfit. After a whirlwind of scans and tests, the doctors suggested I should consult a specialist, although I could tell they hadn't much faith I would ever recover. Good thing I never wanted to be a police sketch artist. Because some of the creep shots were taken from the back garden, Darren and I moved to a new house on the opposite side of town. Anytime I caught a glimpse of my reflection, my pulse launched into the stratosphere, so I insisted we not keep any mirrors. Early one morning, a fortnight later, a stranger with a profile matching my attacker's knocked on the front door. I'd already grabbed a vase that sat on a nearby side table when, in a silly voice, Darren said he was sorry to bother me, but that I had the most beautiful eyes he'd ever seen, and presented me with a bouquet of roses. He was teasing me again, playing make-believe like old times. Now on the verge of a heart attack, I told him I needed to sit. He apologized 1,000 times. I told him it was okay, but that I'd prefer we never did that silly role-play game ever again. He of course agreed. In the weeks that followed, my confidence in my ability to read people swelled. Everybody had a tell, be it a tendency to wear noisy jewelry or a compulsive habit of scratching their ear. In time, I adapted to this new way of seeing, or not seeing, the world. Until tonight. There we were, watching Rick and Morty in the bedroom. I'd never liked cartoons before, but since the Diagnosis live-action stuff had become tricky to follow, so I gravitated towards anything with bright colors and distinct patterns. Afterwards, as I lay facing the wall and scrolling through Reddit, Darren pulled on his navy robe and shuffled off downstairs to use the bathroom. I was still reading the same post when footsteps came marching along the hall. Straight away my skin prickled. Why? Was it the speed? Or maybe the rhythm? As the door creaked open, I glanced over at Darren, still in his robe. By the time he crossed the room and slid in next to me, my spine was slicked with sweat. I could still smell the woody scent of his cologne, so what set off the alarm bells in my mind? As an arm reached out and coiled around my stomach, my heart thrashed against my chest. At the corner of my eye, a blank face stared straight at me, silent and unmoving. The way that rough hand probed my stomach and the taste of those foul breaths, it all evoked memories of the tunnel. I rolled toward the wall, suddenly trapped beneath the hot cavern of bedclothes. And that brings us to now. I can't tell if I'm being paranoid or if the figure beside me is my stalker posing as my husband. If it is my stalker, he must have learned about my condition from the article and is living out his fantasy. I'm afraid what might happen if I run or call the police. I'm not even letting myself think about what happened to Darren. But it could also be I'm freaking out over nothing, like before. There's no way to be sure without making it obvious I'm suspicious. So I'm just gonna lie here pretending to browse Reddit until whoever's beside me's breaths fall into a slow, rhythmic pattern. Then I'll slip away as quietly as I can. So if you don't hear from me again, you'll know my instincts were correct. My prank on my girlfriend went horribly wrong. I promise you, you'd never know how you'd react when you see one in person. Its immense size completely dwarfs you. Standing erect, on its massive rear legs, it easily would have been over 7 feet tall. I remember when I saw it, I stared into its cold, lifeless eyes. It was so fucking awesome. I jumped on it and hugged it, right there in the hallway outside my apartment. The delivery guy probably thought I was completely nuts, but I didn't care in the slightest. I knew it was big from the sight, but I just couldn't get over huge that teddy bear was in person. My plans for the prank on my girlfriend were perfect. At least that is what I thought. I did all the meticulous planning beforehand. I mean, it wasn't rocket science or anything. Really, I just needed to remove some of the stuffing so that I could slip inside and wait for my girlfriend to enter our apartment. I'd wait there, hidden within the confines of the soft bear's interior, and then suddenly spring to life, startling her. Mina would freak. Originally, my goal was to leave him out for a few weeks, slumped up in the corner of my living room, looking adorable and innocuous. I couldn't wait that long though, I was too excited. I left him out for just a few nights, just long enough for Mina to get used to him and not become suspicious. Removing the stuffing was a pain. It took about an hour, but I passed the time sipping on Favorite My Drink, a vintage from Ohio, if you can believe it. Anyway, I had to be careful with the cuts that I made into the teddy bear's lining so that it wouldn't look like the bear had been butchered. Plus, I had to leave just enough stuffing in there that he still retained his signature rotund shape. The eyes, though, were perfect. They were tinted, dark plastic, but still somewhat transparent. Mina wouldn't be able to see my eyes looking through, but I would be able to see her clear as night. So anyway, I was ready. This was it. I crawled into Teddy, as I was now calling him, and closed him back up, sealing me inside of him. I then waited anxiously for my girlfriend to get home. Mina usually worked late on most afternoons and evenings, but she always made it home well before I did. She wouldn't suspect a thing. It took about 20 minutes, but I heard footsteps coming from out in the hallway, accompanied by the jingling of keys. Immediately I could sense something was wrong. There were too many footsteps. "Come on in, he's not here." "I promise," she said as she entered our dark home. She looked amazing, as always, dressed in tight jeans and a thin red sweater. It looked like something she would wear when going out for drinks with some of the other teachers she worked with. In fact, I thought she was going out for drinks with some of her coworkers that evening. Instead, following closely behind her was a man. He looked serious, like a former goth that had enlisted in the Marines. His closely cropped black hair and large frame made him look like some kind of hunter. His skin was super pale and contrasted sharply with his raven hair. He had a small satchel that was hanging from his shoulder. It takes a lot to intimidate someone like me, but something about this strange man was unnerving. "Can I get you a drink?" Mina asked the man as he closed the front door cautiously behind them. No doubt about it, Mina seemed to be flirting. She grabbed his biceps slightly and then smiled and said, "I think I have some alcohol in the fridge." Fuck! How could she fucking do this to me? It took every ounce of self-control that I had not to leap from the bear and yell. I honestly don't know why I didn't. Maybe I was self-conscious of confronting them in a circumstance so ridiculous. Me, flopping around inside this massive teddy bear demanding serious answers from Mina and this surprised stranger. "No, we mustn't. You are most kin, but not now, my love," he said in some weird European accent as Mina stumbled into the kitchen. She clearly had already had a drink or two before. I could see this stranger look around the living room suspiciously. Damn, this guy had the most severe look that I had seen in a long time. Like those photos of military officers from wars in the past. There was the tail end of some tattoo that was just visible from the collar of his shirt. "I know this must be hard for you, but it's the right thing to do," he said to her while walking around on his own. "You'll make it quick though, won't you?" "I'd hate it if he suffered too much," she said from the kitchen. I don't know if I can properly express how scared I felt in that exact moment. trapped in this massive teddy bear while some dangerous-looking man stalked around the inside my apartment. Every movement this guy made seemed lethal. He did glance briefly at me, or the bear at least, and his face registered a hint of disgust, but he didn't say anything. He eventually settled down on the couch in a completely stiff position and waited for Mina. "Here is a glass of water anyway." What do you want me to do? Should I call him?" "He usually doesn't come home until later, but I can see if I can get him to come now," she said, running her fingers down this stranger's back. Damn, my cell phone. It was in my pocket. I'm pretty sure I set it to silent before I got in, but I wasn't 100% sure. If she called me and my phone went off, even on buzz, it would alert this dangerous guy to the fact I was here. He looked like a coiled viper on the couch. The slightest noise seemed like it would have set him off. "Thank you, Mina." "Yes, just call and say that you need his help and it's urgent. If he cares for you, he will come quickly," he said, again in his odd accent. Mina then took out her phone and appeared to be attempting to call me. I just sat there, waiting to get discovered. I mean, honestly, in the worst case scenario, I'm almost sure that I could take the guy. He looked dangerous, but I'm not weak. I'm just not 100% certain, as it were. I don't like to fight battles that I was unsure of winning. He's not answering. It went to voicemail, she added to my relief. Her face showed some kind of concern that I wasn't used to seeing. Like she was sad for disappointing this man. "It is fine. Mina, listen to me, you must leave this place and go to a hotel. I will wait here for him. I promise you I will be all right. I will call you as soon as it's done. Please, leave and be safe." "I love you," he said. Mina kissed this man and then grabbed her bag before leaving our place, leaving me and this stranger alone in my quiet apartment. I just sat there watching him. He remained sat on the couch for minutes staring at the wall. There was something bouncing around in his head, but I just couldn't imagine what. I couldn't imagine this night turning out any weirder than it already had so far. After a little while, with both of us completely still, the stranger stood solemnly. Standing next to Mina, he was tall, but by himself he seemed to stretch even a tad taller. He tossed the satchel on the couch where it made a horrifying clackety noise, like thin metal objects banging against each other. He stretched his arms back and grunted. Then he continued his bizarre behavior by taking off his coat and unbuttoning his shirt. Finally, he tossed his shirt back on the couch and stood there half naked. I was glad that I didn't jump out before when they walked in. This guy now scared the shit out of me. Upon almost every inch of his torso were strange tattoos and odd scars. I couldn't tell what the majority of the tattoos were, but there was no mistaking the multitude of crosses. They were everywhere on his chest, stomach, and arms. The stranger then started breathing deeply with his eyes closed. He removed his belt, which was some kind of oddly braided leather belt. He held it in his right hand tightly and his lips moved in some kind of silent speech. He did this for like 5 minutes while I looked on in horror. Suddenly, without warning, he shouted, "Domini!" I don't think I flinched, but I can't promise that. "Domini! O Domini, fortitudine mihi de," he said in that ugly language. Then he took the braided belt that was in his right and whipped it violently onto his back where it made a sickening thwacking noise. He repeated his chant over and over as he whipped himself right there in the middle of my living while a fucking silly giant teddy bear looked on. "Here, Jeef me to cracked," he shouted finally, slightly louder this time. It looked like tears were flowing down his face. Yeah, I knew I had to get the hell out of there now. How was I going to do that? I just couldn't think of a way to do it in a way that wouldn't draw attention to me. Who was this guy? Where the hell did Mina find him? Or was he the one that found Mina? This stranger then reached back to his satchel, and that is when I saw his gruesome back. It was absolutely covered in old and fresh wounds. Lines upon lines of self-punishment that meant something to this guy alone. He reached into his bag and pulled out a bundle of knives and bolts. I decided right then that I had no choice. I had to get out of this bear and attack him before he could attack me. This guy was clearly intent on killing me. The only advantage that I had was that of surprise. If I could calm my nerves long enough, I was certain I would at least have a fighting chance. I braced myself, counting down silently in my head before leaping up. I don't think I'd have time to remove the bare head or get out of the suit, so I'd just have to attack while in it. That's when his phone rang. He answered it. It was Mina. She was hysterical and saying that she didn't want him to die. Her shrill voice jumping from the stranger's speaker. The stranger tried to calm down Mina, but she was hysterical. "Stay where you are, I'll be there shortly." "It will be all right, my love." "I will be all right." "We will be all right," he said. He then put his clothes back on with a strange speed and then put back the items into his bag and stormed out of my apartment. His sudden absence left like a really strange silence in the apartment. I had never felt it so empty. I quickly got out of the bear and ran to the bedroom where I grabbed a few clothes. I'm sure I looked spooked. There was no need to check the mirror for obvious reasons, but I hated to look like some coward fleeing my own home. I know I'll never see Mina again. I really liked Mina. Seeing her with this guy was awful. How long had she known this guy? Was our whole relationship a lie? I headed out alone into the night. There are other cities out there and other Minas, so I'm sure I'll be fine. Damn, it sucks, you know. It's like you think you know someone, but you don't. Like they are hiding who they are from you, and if it weren't for that stupid teddy bear, I might be dead.